Well, good evening again, or at least it's evening in Australia. You know, it's generally at this time of the year that we sit down and we begin to look at our New Year's resolution. Many thousands, if not millions of people attempt to set their New Year's resolution. And sadly, with most of people, this only lasts just days, if that. So as we come to the end of 2018, I wonder what the cry on the heart of many people has been this past year. For many people, it has been a hard year. For many people, they have struggled. And perhaps as you come to the end of 2018, the cry that is on your heart is, I'm glad it's over. And I hope 2019 will be better. Well, I've got a message for you tonight. And that message is this, that if you go into 2019 with that kind of attitude, then next year will be even worse than this year. So what does 2019 hold for us? I am Prophet Tom, and I come to you with a word from the Lord, so that as you enter 2019, you will enter it with victory, with confidence, with assurance that the enemy is defeated. Already we've got a few on. I welcome Tony, my friend from Warwick. G'day, mate. It's good to see you. And then there's June and Bishop George. It's great to see you guys coming on, and Francis and Sam. So it's great to see you guys already coming online. We've got an exciting word for you today. Again, I am Prophet Tom, and I come with a word from the Lord for you guys today. If we were going to go in our Bibles to 1 Samuel and go to chapter 16, we begin to lay a foundation here. For we see that God said to Samuel, he said, go and anoint a new king. Go and anoint a new king. And so we know from the scriptures there that Samuel journeyed down to Jesse's house, and he came into Jesse's house, and we see that he said to Jesse, call your sons together. And so Jesse and the sons, and even at this point, Samuel was looking with their mind, with their own eyes. You see, the problem is most of us have gone through 2018 looking at the mind level, looking in the natural eye. We've got to learn to look beyond. You know, when the servant of Elisha got up and he opened the windows, he saw the army of the enemy. But what do you see today? What do you see for 2019? Do you just see the enemy around you again? Do you see the enemy of poverty? Do you see the enemy of sickness? Do you see the enemy of people rejecting you? Well, Elisha got up and he went to the windows and he said these words, Father, open his eyes. And the word that I have in part for you tonight is, Father, open their eyes. You see, I read a message just a few moments ago, in fact, and the message said something like this. It said, Father, come. In 2019, come to us. Well, I'm afraid that's not going to happen. You see, the word of God tells us that God is already here. Isaiah said, the earth is full of his glory. Oh, that excites me to know that this earth is already full of his glory. So it's no point in us saying, Father, come. Father, heal me. Father, do this. There's a part that we've got to play. We've got to focus. We've got to focus. And so the question here is, what are we focusing on? You see, Samuel, when he came into Jesse's house, Jesse and Samuel and the brothers were focusing on the natural. What are we focusing on as we enter 2019? What is your focus? You know, my friend Tony is going over to do missions work in just a few days' time. And as I talk to him, I know what he's focusing on. So what are we focusing on? What are we focusing on tonight? We see here with Samuel, it said this in verse 11 of chapter 16. And Samuel said to Jesse, are all the young men here? And he said, there remains yet a younger one. You see, Jesse wasn't even interested in David. Now, let me perhaps correct something here, because many people have said, well, you know, David's only a boy and only a little fellow. Well, you know, I know some 17-year-old boys, and they're bigger and stronger than I am. And David had already slain a lion and had slain a bear. So, you know, he was not some skinny little kid that was just 17 years of age. You see, the reason that he was rejected by his father to be the king, and the reason he was rejected by others, is because he would go and worship God and play music. You see, that wasn't a man thing to do, go and play music. He would go out there and play music, and God would give revelations. And God saw this, and God said, there's my king. You see, it's not what we see with our natural eye. And this is the key to this message tonight. It's not what you see with your natural eye. The message I have for you tonight is, where are your eyes? Where are you focused? You see, in John and chapter 1, it says these words, and we'll just turn to it. It says, John chapter 1 and verse 1, it says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Then verse 14 says this, and the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we beheld his glory, the glory of the only begotten of the Father, full of grace and truth. You see, we've got to learn to focus on the Word. We can't be focusing on materialistic things. We can't be focusing on man. We can't be focusing on objects or people or even promises. In fact, let me tell you this, believers, we can't even be focusing on healings. We can't be focusing on provisions. You see, the children of Israel, and we'll look at this if we get that far, but the children of Israel were in the wilderness, and every day, supernaturally, God provided food. Every day, supernaturally, God provided water. But because they refused to go into the promised land, 40 years later, they died in the wilderness. You see, they did not focus on God. They did not focus on God. And so here they called David in. And verse 13 says this, then Samuel took the horn of the oil and anointed him in the midst of his brothers, and the Spirit of the Lord came upon David from that day forth. He didn't say the Spirit of the Lord came on him that day, and tomorrow he'll need another one, and the next day he'll need to be topped up again. It said the Spirit of the Lord came upon him. A Spirit of the Lord came upon him. Now let's just jump over to chapter 17 for a moment, because again, we're going to see the results of focusing. See, many of you have focused on your hurts. Many of you are focused on your situations this year. You know, you've been out of work and you don't have the finances that you would desire, and you've been focusing on people to supply for you. You know, I get calls every day on Facebook and calls from beautiful people in the third world nations, and I spend most of my ministry in the third world nations. And these people will say, look, we started a school, but we need some money to buy books. Look, we've got an orphanage and we need some food to provide for the children. And, you know, all of those things are correct. The problem there is that our focus is wrong. You see, the people that call me are calling for money. They're looking with their natural eye. God say, focus on me. Focus on me. And so here in chapter 17 of 1 Samuel, we see that the Philistines stood on one side of the mountain. There was a valley in the middle, and Israel stood on the other side. Now listen to this, and it says this, and the Philistines said, I defile the armies of Israel this day. Give me a man who will fight. And you know, every day for 40 days, 40 nights, twice a day, the Philistine, Goliath, would come out, and he was building fear into Israel, that by the time David came into the camp as a 17-year-old boy or man, he came in and Goliath stood on the other side of the mountain. And when he opened his mouth to speak, Israel ran and hid. The army of Israel had allowed fear to come in. Why did they allow fear to come in? Because they looked with their natural eye. See, how are you looking today? How are you looking today? It's good to see Pastor Steve Penny come on and listen tonight. Great to have you there, Steve. I've sat under your ministry many times and enjoyed your preaching. So how are we focused tonight? You know, as we look back this past year and the hurts of this past year, what is affecting us? Well, you know, David comes into the camp, and the moment he comes into the camp, even though, you know, his brothers knew that he had been anointed to be king, they try to push him down. You know, when you begin to get serious with God, when you begin to focus on Jesus, when your eyes are focused on him and nothing else, people will want to push you down. You see, the enemy is only interested in destroying those who are serious with God. And so verse 16 says, and the Philistine drew near and presented himself 40 days, morning and evening. 80 times Israel let him speak. Oh, listen to me, church. Listen to me, believers. Listen to me, people that are listening to this. Don't allow the enemy to come in and say you're a nothing. Don't allow the enemy to come in and say you're old or you're young or you're inexperienced or you're not inexperienced. Don't allow the enemy to sow one seed. Be like a David, stand up and say, I will not allow you to defile the name of the living God. And so Goliath defiled them. And then verse 24 says this, and all the men of Israel, when they saw, fled. But David comes and he goes to the king. And the king allows him to fight Goliath, but wants him to put on an armor that's not his. You see, you can't be the next Billy Graham. You can't be the next Benny Hinn. You can't be the next great man of God that's been around in the last century or whatever. Smith Wigglesworth. You've got to be you. Psalms 139 says, God has uniquely made you. He formed you from the substance. He called you, set you apart. You are unique. So you've got to be you. And so David takes off the armor. He goes out and he gets 5 stones. Now, I'm not going to go into the stones, but let me say this, that Goliath had 4 other brothers. He was ready for the others as well. And he goes down and he challenged. And see, Goliath is looking with the natural eye. He says, I'm going to wipe you out. But listen to David. He says, this day, this is David prophesying to Goliath. He said, this day, the Lord will deliver you into my hands, and I will strike you and take your head from you. And this day, I will give the carcass, I will give your carcass and the carcass of the camp of the Philistines to the birds of the air and the wild beasts of the earth. He didn't know that Israel would follow him once he killed Goliath. He was ready. Even if he went on his own, the Philistines were going to be destroyed. Why? Because he had the army of God. Remember Elisha, I should say, and his servant? Elisha said, Lord, show him your army. There's a vast army. You know, everywhere we go, even in 2018, everywhere you walked on this earth, the army of God was there. You just didn't see it. The army of God was there, my friend. You didn't just see it. You know, I read a story just a few months ago, and it was the story of the footsteps, the footprints. And this man was talking to God, and he said to God, he said, God, he said, I understand when there was when there were 2 steps of footprints. He said, that was you walking with me. And he said, I understand when there was only 1 set of footprints, because that's when you were carrying me. But Father, I don't understand why there's a mixture of footprints going everywhere and making no sense. What are these footprints? He said to God, and God said to him, these footprints is when you had victory, and you and I were dancing. See, God never leaves us nor forsakes us. He's with us every moment of the time. And so tonight, when you're look back over this last year and you had your defeats, God was there. You just didn't have your eyes open. And John chapter 1 tells us that Christ is the Word. You see, we must have our eyes on the Word. We must have our eyes on the Word. And so we read on, it says this, then all this assemble shall know the Lord does not save with sword or spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give it you into my hands. So it was, when the Philistine rose and came to draw near to meet David, that David hurled and ran towards him. See, David didn't walk. Don't walk towards your enemy. Don't allow him to talk. Oh, get in there and kick him. He's under our feet. Crush him. Oh, I like that. I like the crushing bit. And David picked up his stone out of his pocket, and he had his sling in his other hand, and he's ready, my friend. He's ready. He's put the stone in the sling, and he begins to run down that mountain into the valley. He's ready to combat. He's ready to fight. Oh, that's how we need to be in 2019, church. We need to be ready to fight. The enemy is hitting us from every flank, from the north, the south, the east, and the west. Governments are being deceived by the enemy. Society is being deceived by the enemy. But it doesn't matter what the situation looks like, church. Pick up your sling, pick up your stone, be like David, run down that valley to Satan and say, this day your head is my head. I will cut your head off and you will be defeated. And so it was, when the Philistine arose and came near and drew near to David, that David hurried and ran towards the army to meet the Philistine. Then David put his hand into his bag and took out a stone, and he slung it and struck the Philistine in the forehead, so that the stone stuck deep into his forehead, and he fell on the face of the earth. And so David prevailed. David prevailed. See, that's got to be it in 2019. We've got to not just prevail. It doesn't mean that. It means we've got to destroy. We've got to destroy the enemy. Whatever the enemy. Oh, my great friend Mike from Eldoret, my BitTalk. Good day, mate. It's great to have you on here with us. I love this man. He's got a powerful church, and it's great to have him there with us. And all the other people that are joining, it's exciting to see you on here. And so the focus today must be that our eyes are on Jesus. Our eyes on Jesus. You see, David prevailed. He prevailed over the Philistine with a sling and a stone. But David prophesied that the head of Goliath would be cut off this day. He didn't have a sword. How did he cut his head off? This is important. Listen to this. This is important. David used the weapon of the enemy to destroy the enemy. And you, in 2019, will use the weapon of the enemy to destroy the enemy. Oh, hallelujah! Glory to God. That's exciting. I'm just excited about that. I can't wait till 2019. Come on, 2019. I want the enemy's weapon. I'm going to cut Satan's head off. He's going to be defeated. Oh, hallelujah. And so David took the head of the Philistine and brought it into Jerusalem. And so it goes on that he slew the enemy on that day. But I want us to go back, because we were talking about Israel in the wilderness. Now I know our time is already nearly gone, and that's a shame. But in the story of Joshua, we see four important things. Now, we're not going to cover those things because that would take me the next 40 minutes or even longer. But we see these questions. The answer that we need to read from Joshua chapter 1 and through Joshua, it says, what did they see? You see, Israel were in the wilderness. Joshua was in the wilderness. He came to the Jordan. God said, cross over the Jordan. And they're over on the other side. And then Joshua gets himself together and he goes to confront Jericho on his own. He's looking for a plan. He's looking with the natural eye. But on the way, he has an encounter. On the way, he meets the captain of the host. On the way, his eyes are taken off Jericho and put onto Jesus. Let me go for a moment to the book of Psalms. And in the book of Psalms, 118, just going back to David for a moment. And it says in the book of Psalms, 118 and verse 22, it says this: the stone which the builders rejected has become the chief cornerstone. You see, David took a stone to destroy the enemy. He took Jesus to destroy the enemy. And it says in Proverbs, in fact, let me go on a little bit further. And it says in Proverbs chapter 4 and verse 20, it says these words: my son, give attention to my word. See, give attention to me. Focus on Jesus. Give attention to me. Incline thine ear for my sayings. Do not see, don't cry out and say, God, speak to me. God's speaking. We're just not listening. God's speaking. We're just not listening. Do not let them depart from your eyes. Do not let them depart from your eyes. Keep them in the midst of your heart. For they are life to those who find them and health to all flesh. Now, this is what happened to Joshua. Moses is dead. God comes to Joshua and he says these words: every place that the sole of your foot treads, I have given it to you. He says in verse 6, be strong and of good courage, for to this people you shall divide an inheritance of the land which I swore to your fathers to give to you. You see, God had given a promise, and God has given us a promise, church. God has given us a promise. Enter 2019, not with a defeated attitude. Enter 2019, not with wrong attitudes. Enter 2019 with a promise of Almighty God. I heard someone say, is God in sovereign control of the earth? And the answer to that is no, he's not. Because if he was in sovereign control, then he's in control of all the wars and the murders and the abortions. No, you see, we have things to do. And we've got to focus. We can be in literal hell. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego stood before the king at Nebuchadnezzar. And Nebuchadnezzar says, bow to me, or I'll throw you in the furnace. They kept their eyes focused on Jesus. In the midst of the most powerful nation. See, your nation is not as powerful as Babylon was. But in the midst of this powerful nation, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego said, our eyes are fixed on Jesus. And that's what we've got to say. In 2019, our eyes are fixed upon Jesus. You see, where? What do we see? Do we see Jericho? Or do we see the captain of the host? You know, there was a miracle that occurred in 1997. And this was in the midst of the revival in Brownsville, in Pensacola, Florida. And that revival went on for 5 years, for any that may not know. And they estimate that over 4 million people went through the church in that time from all over the world. Well, in 1997, there was a man in the service, and they were worshiping God, and they were lost in the spirit as they're worshiping God. Now, this man had been to Afghanistan in the Army of America. And while he was in Afghanistan, someone threw a grenade into his tent. And so he grabbed this grenade, because there were other men in the tent, I should say. And he grabbed this grenade to throw it outside. And as he threw it, it went off. And it blew his fingers off on his hand. And he had no fingers. And this day, he's in church and he's worshiping. And this hand that had no fingers, as he was lost, as his eyes were focused only on God, as his eyes were focused only on God. He was not looking at his hand. He was not looking at the environment around about him. He was not complaining whether the music was loud or too quiet. He was not complaining that he couldn't get a good seat in the church. He was focused on Jesus. And he's worshiping Jesus. And he's worshiping Jesus. And he's worshiping Jesus. And all of a sudden, his wife screams out, And the pastor looks over at his wife, and people begin to look at his wife, who was screaming and screaming in the seat next to him. And the pastor came down, Pastor John Kilpatrick came down, and in front of John Kilpatrick's eyes, and in front of the wife's eyes, and in front of the congregation in that church, this hand began to grow to the point that it looked just like mine. You see, the man had been to doctors who could do nothing. The nerves were dead. The man had had physio on his hand who could do nothing. The nerves were dead. But on that day, the man put his eyes on Jesus, and the fingers grew. Our time is gone, but let me give you one more scripture. Go to Joshua chapter 5. I got so much more I could give you, but I can't. And it says this in verse 9. Then the Lord said to Joshua, this day I have rolled away the reproach of Egypt from you. You see, when Israel came to Gilgal, which is separation, when they separated themselves from the world, church, as you enter 2019, go to Gilgal. Separate yourself from the world. Focus only on Jesus. And then God said this. He said, the reproach of Egypt, the hurts from Egypt, the pain of Egypt, the infliction that was put upon you on Egypt, today no longer exists. They're gone. God's saying to you, whatever happened in 2018, whatever happened in 1950 if you're alive, whatever happened in 1970, when you enter Gilgal, when you give your heart to Jesus, they're gone. They're gone. They're gone. Wow, they're gone. All sins, all hurts, all rejections. Doesn't matter what your teacher said. It doesn't matter what your parents said. The parents might have said you'll never be any good. You'll never be nothing. And I could give you many stories on that. It doesn't matter, because Jesus washed them all away. And so tonight, what is the word for 2019? Focus your eyes on Jesus. One last story. Jesus had fed 15,000 people with a child's lunch. He puts the believers, these disciples, I should say, in the boat. He tells them to go across to the other side. And in the middle of the night, he comes walking on water. And we know the story so well. They get there, they look at him walking, they think it's a ghost. You see, they're looking with a natural eye. That's the problem with the church today. We're looking with the natural eye. And Peter says, well, Jesus, if it's you, bid me to come. And you know, when we get serious with Jesus, and this will happen to you in 2019, it's going to be hard to walk by faith. It's going to be hard to focus on Jesus and not the doctors, or not the financial institutes, or not what's on your table or not on your table. Focusing on Jesus. And so Peter gets out, and he's getting out of the boat. He puts one foot over, and fear begins to grip him. He hangs on. The words of Jesus is ringing his heart. Get out of the boat, Peter. Get out of the boat, Peter. He puts the other leg over. He puts one on the water, and it doesn't sink. He thinks, I can do this. I can do this. I can do this. Church, as you enter 2019, you can do this. Yes, you can defeat the enemy. You can defeat the enemy of depression. You can defeat the enemy of poverty. You can defeat the enemy of sickness. You can defeat the enemy of slavery. He turns around, his eyes are fixed upon Jesus, and he walks on water. He does the impossible. In 2019, fix your eyes upon Jesus, and you will do the impossible. Let me pray for you. Father, what a joy it is to be able to share on Facebook like this with these beautiful people. So many are contacting and made contact with us. And I pray, Lord, that they've been encouraged this evening, my time anyway, and they've received something special. And as they enter 2019, they will enter with their eyes fixed upon you. And then they will live and walk and operate in the supernatural. They will do the impossible. Bless them, Lord. Bless them, Lord. It wasn't easy for Peter to get out of the boat. The other 11 stayed in the boat. They wanted the comfort and security, even though it was sinking through the storm. Peter got out and did the impossible. Father, in 2019, we're getting out of the boat and we're going to do the impossible. Amen. Well, what a joy it's been to be with you today. Starting from next week, I'm going to begin a series, as I told you, on the names of God. There'll be daily devotion. It's a new book I'm writing. And so we will cover a different name, and we'll do this on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And so we'll either start it next week or the week after. I have some family coming to stay with us, but we can still do that. And so we're going to begin to look at the names of God. And there are over 1,000 names in the Bible that are ascribed to God. And so it's an exciting venture. I begin to do this, and I'm just so excited because, you see, you must know the name of God before the work of God will operate within your life. Love you guys. Have a great end of the year and enter 2019 with victory ringing in your heart. Amen. Now, if you want to make comment, please do, and I'll return those comments. It's a joy to be able to come with you. And you know, if you want to share your vision for 2019, what God is showing you, jot it down and send it to me. I'd love to get it, love to read it, and love to pray with you that it will be birthed. God bless you. Amen.